Welcome to the Libertarian Institute YouTube and Odyssey channel. Today I am joined by the Justin Raimondo Fellow at the Libertarian Institute, Patrick McFarland. He is also the host of the Vital Dissent podcast. Patrick, what's going on, brother?
Hey, good to be with you, Keith.
I came across this section from Michael Malice's new book, The White Pill. I thought Patrick and I could go over it section by section. Patrick, before we get in, what are your general thoughts on Malice? I love seeing him on Rogan, Lex Friedman. I saw him on Fox. I think he's certainly, without question, a huge net benefit to the freedom movement, where he's very likable and people see him and they go, well, anarchists, the philosophy's, bizarre and about chaos, but this guy seems good, so maybe I should look into it. What are your thoughts on Malice?
Yeah, I think Malice he's a good communicator and he definitely gets out there. And I think as in on net, he's an asset to the liberty movement, especially with his ability to connect with mainstream media figures. I think that's really important, and it's something that's really needed. I do think that he has a way of exposing mainstream media to people who might be in that lexicon. Although I think I would quibble with him on some important foreign policy takes, I'm not going to attack the guy because I think he's valuable to the movement.
Certainly. Before we get started, I just have to share my favorite Malice quote. So I put this on the blog at the Libertarian Institute. This was a tweet from his in July of last year. Malice says, if the government didn't have a monopoly on security, only rich people would be able to have security. Just like when the government got out of other businesses, the only cars produced were limousines, the only clothes produced were tuxedos, and the only food produced was foie gras. That is just such a perfect example of what I like about him and how quick and clever he is. And he's smashing this huge myth in one or two sentences just on a quick tweet. As far as being white pilled, optimistic about the future, black pilled, pessimistic about the future, where do you stand overall before we read this section?
I kind of vacillate from one thing to the other. I mean, it depends on what my exposure is to social media, and thankfully my business has kept me from really being immersed in that world. And Keith, I installed this blocker called Cold Turkey that blocks Twitter and YouTube and social media during the business day, and it's gonna save me so much money this year.
Oh
I
my
think.
gosh. The
Uh,
opportunity cost, your cardiac arrest will be pushed back 10 years.
I think my blood pressure has gone down too. So I stopped drinking coffee and I turned those things off during the workday. But moreover, it's really it is difficult to stay optimistic, especially with what's going on with Ukraine. And then I did a show on the new arms race. I called it with you have all these nations in the world that are increasing their military budgets. The US is ramping up their defense industry production. Countries like Japan are becoming militarized, at least to an extent that they weren't before. Germany is sending tanks eastward into Russia, while Ukraine, and things are looking very, very bleak. However, I think that the precipice of global annihilation is so stark that you got to think something has to give, right? That people are going to wake up and realize things sometimes.
Certainly. I want to get into the passage. We'll go pretty much one sentence at a time here. Malice says, the foes of liberty are many and they are powerful, but they are not particularly impressive. On that first sentence alone, what do you think?
I mean, I agree with the first part that the foes are many and powerful. I guess I don't know how you would quantify impressiveness. It seems like kind of a subjective standard. I tend to think that these people are very intelligent, and I tend to think that they have um, self-interested ends, but sometimes they have evil ends. And it's like you're trying to talk about something that's so broad with generalizations. But I do think that the people that are in these positions are intelligent and qualified and they're calculating, and for the most part they know what they're doing. And maybe what we see sometimes as being not impressive is their hubris.
That is a very good take. I see someone like Joe Biden, like the president of America. This guy, out of all the Americans, he's the one in charge. So he's got to be just brilliant. and he's clearly got dementia and is a complete moron. So we can knock that off. The vice president is the only person that's probably dumber than the press secretary, who is also a complete buffoon. Like the people who they put in front of us can so easily be refuted on so many grounds. And then you look at the press, whether it's Sean Hannity, Don Lemon, Brian Stelter, Rachel Maddow, Rhodes Scholar Rachel Maddow. So much of what they say is shockingly stupid that you wonder why they're there in the first place. Matt Taibbi has a thesis called The Church of Averageness, where he says, look, the reason that these average people get into these positions of power and influence is because they can be put in front of the citizenry, and the citizenry can nod and agree and not be offended and accept their rule more or less. So I think that's a decent explanation as to why it's like, how aren't there so many progressives that are smarter than Don Lemon or Anderson Cooper, but they're like just stupid enough to not become someone like Jake Sullivan, national security advisor, but they're also smart enough to be someone that people can look up to. If
I
you read Hans Hoppe and then compare it to anything you've read by Paul Krugman, it's just like which one works for the New York Times? Who has more power and influence? It seems like these people can be defeated so easily sometimes. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it it might be by design that people get put in front. Like the people that we see are the ones who are dumb and malleable and ones that you can easily refute. But it doesn't matter because the fact that they are out there, maybe by design, is I think part of the more intelligent plan that works behind the scenes. Like if you read who came out with Propaganda, that famous book.
Edward Bernays.
Yeah, if you read Bernays' Propaganda, I think that those type of things is really what's going on. And then, of course, Biden and Harris are just kind of the figureheads, or they're the designed. It's like that's what they want you to see for reasons that are intelligent and calculated.
Let's go on with this sections. They will do everything within their ability to convince others that their might is eternal, that battle against them is pointless and doomed to fail. This is just another one of their many lies. It is said that they will never give up. Yet, does wanting power over others mean that they will necessarily get it and get it easily? Response to that.
Yeah, I think it's mostly right. I mean, it does seem like it's an eventuality, an inevitability that these people would be in power, and it does appear to be monolithic. However, I think that's kind of an illusion. But yeah, it is that sense of inevitability that really keeps people from action.
Yeah, the sense of inevitability is just so powerful. It's saying, your resistance is futile. You're really you're wasting your scarce time on this earth. It certainly appeals to, every person's fear of rejection, like the old Jerry Seinfeld joke where he's like, people's biggest fear is public speaking. Second is death. This means at a funeral, you'd rather be in the coffin than giving the eulogy because people really are that afraid of disapproval. So when you see powerful people like Eric Swalwell or Joe Biden say things like, you can't take on the American government. The American government has nukes, you moron. I don't know how many nukes the Taliban or the Viet Cong had, but they must have had a lot if that's how they're able to respond to invasions. Anything else on they're so powerful, just give up, you stupid morons who are wasting time?
I mean, only that I hear that a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
just the resignation, not so much as, you silly whatever. Just, well, what can I do? I'm just one person.
Does the fact that they supposedly will never give up somehow imply that their opponents should? Or does it imply the opposite? Evil people surrender all the time. Can you think of any empirical examples? We know this book is about the fall of the Soviet Union, where evil people, try as they might, just didn't have the power to inflict their will on the masses. Trying to think large scale or small scale.
Uh, Hitler. I don't know. That's the first example that comes to mind.
Well,
And there's a reason for that.
try and think of one where the one that comes to mind is Joe Biden running on a 100-day a nationwide mask mandate while he was campaigning for president. He said, I'm really going to take COVID seriously, not like Donald Trump. We're going to have a 100-day nationwide mask mandate. And he then never brought it up again, which is odd because why doesn't he just freaking do it? I mean, you could say, look, we saved tons of lives. Yeah, people died, but imagine how many would have died if my policy wasn't implemented. It seemed like an easy win until you realize the polling showed that there would have been such mass resistance and it would have been like jaywalking. It's like so many people do it, they couldn't have enforced it, and it would have made the regime look so ridiculous and silly. It goes to show that there still are checks and balances, even outside of the state, that people can use in order to combat this tyranny. And Malice uses examples like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania being able to secede from the Soviet Empire. Even the Soviets themselves were up against Tsar Nicholas in 1905 and 1917. Not that that was a good thing, but the point is that these regimes can die. Not to mention the Austrian Empire fell, the French Empire fell, the British Empire managed to fall even after Winston Churchill was victorious in the righteous cause, the Spanish Empire. So we're constantly seeing these things, whether that is the intention or not. Anything else before we move on?
I mean, I would think maybe Anthony Fauci is another example of that, of the, this large vaccination campaign that took place. And even though, a bunch of people were kind of tricked into or forced into getting the first injections, there was still, I think, 30% who refused to do so. And then again, people aren't getting boosters. So maybe the high water mark has passed, but I think that it was unsuccessful largely.
That was a great moment when whitehouse.gov came out and said, for those who didn't get the shot, you're looking at a long winter of severe illness and death. It's like, oh, well, let's put that to the test. It's like certainly that there's a bunch of these right wingers, and they don't care about that they're for the rich, they're racist, they're bigoted, and they're actually going to end life on Earth as we know it because they deny climate change. And like all those people didn't want to take a supposedly life-saving shot. You'd think that progressives would be celebrating that. They'd be like, yay, the evil people are choosing to die voluntarily. This is how we're going to win. We're just going to take over. And we don't even have to kill them. They're just going to get COVID and die. At least, 80, 90% of them are going to go. But I think they knew that. And that's why they weren't exactly celebrating. The people who constantly vilify us are very desperate to also save our lives. Malice continues. He says, evil people surrender all the time. At a certain point, the costs, in every sense of the term, simply become too high. They are not all knowing, far from it. They are often not even particularly bright. They are not all powerful. They are men and women far closer to snakes than they are to gods. Do you remember when Obama came out and said Bashar al-Assad is an illegitimate leader and we need regime change in Syria? I didn't make that up, right? That was a real speech.
Yeah, yeah.
That is another example of how they just couldn't pull public opinion behind it, even after faking the gas attacks. When it comes to that section of this excerpt, what are your thoughts?
Well, could you put it back up on the screen just so I can see it? I think,
Of course. So yeah, I started right here where he says, "Evil people surrender all the time. At a certain point, the costs, in every sense of the term, simply become too high." Sort of like how cocaine is illegal and underage drinking is illegal, but it's everywhere. They can't enforce it. The costs of enforcement are just too damn high.
one thing that immediately comes to mind are the neoconservatives. I mean, they are not all knowing. They are often not even particularly bright, and they are not all powerful. But I guess if I'm playing devil's advocate here, I would say it doesn't matter. It doesn't seem like it matters just because the way that the entrenched interests and systems are set up, they don't have to be bright, and they don't um their hubris does it. They can fail over and over and over again with all their suggestions, and the answer is always, well, we didn't do enough and we need to do more. It's not that the policy directive failed, it's just that we need to go further and be more intense, and we didn't deter enough. And the defeat of the neoconservatives, and at one point it seemed like they were kind of banished, but they're obviously still entrenched in policy making, and they're getting their way in a large way in Ukraine. But the way that they're defeated might be in a mushroom cloud, to pull a certain George W. Bush quote.
But let's hope so. They can, will, and have been defeated many, many times. It is possible that those of us who fight for the dignity of mankind will lose our fight. It is not possible that we must lose our fight. That is the white pill. So I guess to Steelman, Michael Malice's point here, the white pill isn't even, maybe as I misconstrued earlier, as you're optimistic. It's the recognition that it's not inevitable that the evil people will win. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that I'm glad that you made that distinction, because I think it is right, and I don't disagree with that statement. I think it's all hope is not lost. I mean, I really like Lord of the Rings. It's my favorite like fantasy franchise. So um, it's because of the hope and the acts of small people. Even if the chance is a very very small chance, there is still a chance, and I think that's the general message.
Yeah, when I look at the white versus black pilled worldview, you could say, well, I'm really white pilled about the future and I'm optimistic. So I'm going to really be happy and make sure I enjoy myself in the present because, we got nothing to worry about. And if you're black pilled and you say, well, the future is going to be hell on earth, well, even if you think that, then what you want to do is appreciate every second of non complete black pilling that you can still enjoy in this life. So even if you are, given the idea you're going to live forever, cool. Well, enjoy that. You're going to die in 2 years. Well, then I still want to enjoy every second left. In the meantime, just because a bad thing might occur in the future doesn't mean you should be pessimistic. Is there anything I'm missing with that logic?
No, I don't think so. I mean, y- at any rate, the world just generally keeps on turning. Life goes on, and as you know, as an attorney, sometimes you get invested in your cases and you want the results to be as good as possible, but sometimes they don't go well, and things don't come out the way that you wanted them to come out, and you just have to accept that and move forward. You can't Sometimes you don't even really have time to reflect on those results. So you put it in a place, you look at it, and then you take what you can and you move on.
Two miscellaneous topics I actually want to get to, but one thing I think of when I try to be optimistic about the future is my great grandfather Irving living through the First World War in Europe, coming to America completely broke, barely spoke English, and was able to have kids, open his own deli. Those kids became successful. The grandkids are successful, and I, the great grandchild, get to work with people like Scott Horton and Dave Smith and you and Kyle Anzalone and Connor Freeman and Will Porter and everyone else. So I'm trying to think of what was his worldview. He goes, "We just experienced the worst hell on earth ever imaginable. The future is going to be really bright." And then Britain gives a war guarantee to Poland, and a second world war breaks out, killing even more people. This guy must have been, oh, dang it, this is just going to be life on Earth. And then after like 80, what are the estimates? Like 80 million deaths in the Second World War between, 1933, Japan going into China, and then Nagasaki. It's something like in the tens of millions. And then after that, the Soviets get half of Europe. China goes under Mao's control. And then we're fighting proxy wars in Korea and Vietnam and Afghanistan and Angola. And there's like a constant threat of nuclear exchange. And things still came out relatively okay. So even in the darkest of days, I still think we can be optimistic. Final thoughts on the white pill or the black pill?
Final thought is just that if you don't think there's any hope, then why are we even here doing what we're doing? Or why is anyone just continuing on? I mean, you have to believe that there's hope. There's no other option, really.
Oh, yeah. And certainly like family game nights. They're completely underrated, but we've had so much fun finding, like, fun games to play with the family, and it's those moments, it's like, this is why we work and save and invest so we could really enjoy times like this. Um, you are, moving on, very dedicated to the, China issue, bringing a lot of attention to the importance between, the US and China, rising tensions over Taiwan. Can you give us a few bullet points about this issue? What people need to know? What are the misconceptions? What have you learned?
Yeah, so at this point right now, the U.S.-China diplomatic relations have really kind of been defined by Nancy Pelosi's visit that she went over to Taiwan in the beginning of August, and she met with President Tsai and basically discussed future U.S. relations with Taiwan. And there's something that happened in 1979 called the Taiwan Relations Act that basically notified that there's one China, that Taiwan is part of China, that there's one China, and it began this era called strategic ambiguity, where the United States they wouldn't say what they would do in the event of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, and so that's defined U.S.-China relations since 1979. Well, in the last couple decades, the U.S. has gradually been moving away from that, and that was when the United States opened diplomatic relations with China. It was a huge moment, and we've just gradually been moving away from the policies that opened that up and really allowed China to produce a lot of these economic reforms that made the country this economic powerhouse. And so over the decades, especially in the 90s, it has been the US recognition of Taiwanese sovereignty or steps in that direction that have provoked the most antagonistic response from China. And
Th-
go ahead.
I was just gonna say the hubris is just ridiculous. Can't stop the murder rate from going up in Chicago or Baltimore or Philadelphia or South Phoenix. They're like, let me tell you how we're going to arrange Asia. Oh my gosh,
Right.
it's just
Yeah.
unbelievable.
Well, and I mean, there is some argument to be made that from the US perspective, if you are afraid of China and if you do think that China is a global threat, which I don't agree with, but if you do have that, there there is an argument there that confronting China through Taiwan is probably your best strategic move. Um, there's an argument. I think it fails ultimately because you end up antagonizing a situation that doesn't need to be antagonized, and you can't win against China right on their doorstep by starting a proxy war over Taiwan. There's different strategic elements in play. Taiwan is an island. It's not like a generally landlocked area like Ukraine. I know Ukraine, has a sea bordering it, but it's not an isolated nation like Ukraine. Um, so the Chinese could, I mean, they could very easily, and they've been practicing doing this, completely encircle Taiwan and cut off all trade to it. And that would probably be their first move. So it's a very complex and layered topic, but essentially the thing to look forward to right now, um, is the fact that the United States in the 2022 or 23 NDAA has authorized unprecedented military aid and spending to Taiwan and has made it one of its chief foreign military partners in terms of bringing up their military. The U.S. has also been pursuing lots of strategic um, arrangements and partnerships with Pacific nations, mainly Japan, who has agreed to double their military spending. And so there's a big arms race going on. But coming up in the future, Kevin McCarthy, the House Speaker, is talking about visiting Taiwan just in the same way that Nancy Pelosi did. And this is going to be another situation that causes a similar reaction from China. And there have been op-eds in the South China Morning Post saying that maybe it won't be as bad as when Pelosi visited, but essentially when Pelosi visited, it caused a new era of militarization across the strait, with Chinese warplanes now crossing the median line between between Taiwan and China on an almost daily basis. So this is a very concerning and volatile situation, and I don't think that strategically it just seems like the U.S. aim is to escalate on all fronts. You have um, war games going on between the United States and Israel, um, basically that are practicing an invasion of Iran or military action against Iran. You have nuclear threats going back and forth and nuclear armament in North Korea and really hostile, volatile relations over there. You have the Taiwan issue. And of course, you have the elephant in the room, which is Ukraine. So it all pieces together in this global escalation that just keeps simmering.
Should people be optimistic at all that even someone like Kissinger has, gained a small portion of reason when it comes to the Ukraine issue? It was, the common trope was, yeah, they're real tough against Libya and Afghanistan and Iraq, countries without nukes, but countries with nukes where the elites really could face repercussions, then they're going to back down. That was the thought for quite a while, but now it seems like that is, has completely turned around. Is there any reason to be optimistic when you see someone like Kissinger come out and just not explicitly call for world war?
It is encouraging. I mean, it's also encouraging that um, the new right and some of the populist right
Mhm.
figures have stood up. Marjorie Taylor Greene has been very good and outspoken against aid to Ukraine. I think Matt Gaetz has as well. But it's disheartening that they don't see China the same way. So I think you really take what you can get and you identify coalitions and good things. Even with people, I mean, like Henry Kissinger coming out. Although I do believe just in the last week he has said he's turned around again and said, well, Ukraine needs to be part of NATO, and a lot of the bad things that we feared would happen if Ukraine became part of NATO are happening now anyways, so it doesn't really matter in a sense. Um,
So I was wrong about that. Thank you for
well, you were
correcting.
right. I mean, you were right initially because Kissinger did come out and was very concerned, gravely concerned about it, but it's just a recent development that he seems to have done a 180 again. So I don't
Mm.
know.
Well, one final thing. One of the primary myths that statists will use as a justification for the state is if you didn't have a monopoly on violence, you would have like all these people with competing worldviews, and this would be very chaotic. What you need is a center of objectivity where there's just one rule that applies to everyone. So at least people know what it is. It's far from perfect, but at least people know what it is. The response to this, that one of the many, but the one that I've focused on is called The Myth of the Rule of Law by John Hasness, where he says, what you think is objective law is not really that at all. Even the very First Amendment, judges don't agree on what constitutes a violation of the First Amendment or the Second Amendment, let alone legislation that's thousands of pages long that no one's ever read. When it comes to this myth of the rule of law as an attorney, have you come across this in your field where two judges can look at the exact same case and judge differently?
Every day. Yeah, every single day. That's just the way it goes. I mean, you there's something called discretion, an abuse of discretion. So essentially when a judge is hearing a set of facts and one side argues, mom shouldn't have the kids 50-50 because she was doing drugs and she has these pending criminal convictions, and then the other side, well, dad shouldn't have the kids because he took them to Coney Island and left them alone or whatever, and the
Mhm.
judge needs to look at the facts and decide, well, which one should have the kids and which one should make the choice. As long as the judge is within a certain spectrum, the appeals court can't overturn he or she. And so, unless they failed to look at the facts and apply the standard of law and reach a reasonable result, then the appeals court will stamp, they will not overturn that decision. And so when you have other things that are a little more esoteric, like a complex contract negotiation, like take this Steven Crowder situation in the Daily Wire. If if Steven Crowder had signed the contract and there was a certain clause that was ambiguous, and we already have heard arguments from both sides, right? They've been going back and forth about these censorship terms and about how much money Crowder would lose if he didn't post a certain amount of episodes and all these things. If a judge were looking at it, both of the sides could make reasonable, correct arguments. But at the end of the day, the judge has to choose one argument over the other. And there's no objective truth about which one made the better argument. It really depends on what it is. And so we see that when the rubber meets the road with a law at any time, that is the reality of the situation. That there's no objectively correct answer.
And especially at the beginning of that term sheet where it said Crowder will produce 192 episodes. Well, the number 192 is pretty objective. And then it goes on to say of equal or greater value than, it was basically saying he has to maintain the quality that he's currently produced. Show me the objective example of maintaining quality.
Yeah.
Seinfeld, season 1 versus season 5 versus season 9. I mean, come on. That's so ambiguous, but that's just the nature of reality under any system that's going to
Yeah.
occur, which is why it's so dangerous to have a coercively funded monopoly in something so vitally important. Patrick, final words, and where can people find your show?
Yeah, on that too, just as a final note, it's like take self-defense laws.
Mm.
Like the person reasonably believes that their life is in imminent danger, and that's why we have juries, and that's why judges' opinions are called opinions. So, all right, so vitaldescent.com is where you can find my work. You can also find it at the Libertarian Institute, libertarianinstitute.org/Patrick, and that's where you can find my stuff.
Hey, you all, it's fundraising time again at the Libertarian Institute. We try not to do this to you too often, but business is business after all. I got a great group of guys and a gal at the Institute, and I got to pay them. So just go to libertarianinstitute.org/donate to pick your price and help out. We've got some great kickbacks too, books and shirts. Great ones. That's libertarianinstitute.org/donate. And thank you all very much.